Here we go. There it is. There's the line. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for one of our conversations following this film. Would you please welcome Dr. Ying Chen from the Australian Centre for China and the World. I got that right? I keep getting those words mixed up. Yeah, great. And also Dr. Luigi Tomba, and of course the director of the film, Nick Torrens. Thank you. We might begin with Nick. Why not? You mentioned in your introduction that you spent many years visiting China and speaking with people, communities from various parts of China, and all of their stories have in some ways fed into this documentary. I thought maybe you might like to give us a little bit of the background as to how this particular project came into being, and maybe what it was through your interaction with these various communities across China that was the inspiration for the film.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I guess in brief, it's just that what I was saying was I wanted to actually try to carry the voice of ordinary people to the West, because I felt there was a lot of blockages. Scholars could read and discover all sorts of things. Ordinary people who are watching television or reading newspapers or reading generally about China weren't, I felt, getting an idea of what China was really, where it had come from and where it was going. And this was in the mid-90s. So I commenced, going there quite often and filming different stories of people I got to know or discovered and follow their stories. But it was really basically an unfunded project, this one. It was basically just going there alone and filming on a credit card. And then the Australian government came in about 2006 with a very low budget, what was then called the Innovation Fund for films that were not directed definitely at a particular television network or something like that, and that helped me to keep going.
Indeed, because wouldn't you have found over all of that time that the story was evolving and changing, much as we've seen China evolving and changing over the past 2 decades? So did you begin to make a film that, in the end, you possibly made something very different, do you feel?
In some ways, well, a documentary is always like this, of course, but the idea was really, the central idea, I mean, it was always called Three Dreams, and that was because I kind of felt, I loved the idea that people kept telling me that until recent times, the Three Dreams variations of it were, a watch, a wireless and a bicycle, and then, of course, we began to understand the new purchasing power of the growing middle class. And so I thought the changing of Three Dreams was terribly interesting. And when I found Zhang Lei, and she explained the way she thought about it, and that the new Three Dreams were the ones she described, the dream of Deng Xiaoping, which was to make China rich and powerful under capitalism with under government control. And the second dream was intensified by that, which was the continual dream of a better life. And then the third dream was what she came out with at the very end, was her explanation. It was the dream of meaningful existence, which she says is almost impossible.
And of course her story is so compelling because you're following her, discovering her own country, discovering her own family, which is quite an amazing thing. I'm interested to hear from Luigi and Ying, the man in the film who's speaking about the 4 generations who've lost belief and have lost attachment to the way of China.
But what I think is most interesting is that there is, and it's something that has to do with China as much as it has to do with this movie, is this variety of narratives that are at play in this particular story. And one of the things that I think comes out very clearly here is that you have a young woman, I don't know how old she is, maybe in mid-30s, or about in mid-40s, or 40s, roundabout, and she struggles with, I think, this very specific problem, which is a problem that she has, but it's also a problem that China very much has until today.
Look, I think that's absolutely right, Luigi. I feel that the way that she led this story was that she felt very unhappy when I first met her. and basically she didn't really know why she was so unhappy. But when I used to talk to her, she began to think about it a bit more, because some foreigner is now talking to me about these things, and so she began to kind of explain things to me. And as she explained them, she wanted to know more than she realized she knew. And then she enlisted her cousin, Zhang Lei, who was a wonderful companion for her, to find out, because he's younger than her, much younger. And so she then went into those areas that, in a way, she hadn't been courageous enough, she said to me, to go before. It's quite courageous to actually confront your father and mother that more or less abandoned you. And the further she got into that story, the more she realized that it wasn't just her, it was the whole nation as she saw it. And so she began to really reinterpret her own behavior and her own feelings and her own obsessions as a person who's always been rubbished by her contemporaries, as someone who was always looking for the meaning of life. Why do you do that? Why don't you just have fun? And in those ways, I think she was given courage by the fact that the person was filming her. I mean, I think that happens sometimes, don't you think, Ying?
Yeah, I think that for me, what's most moving about this film is that the fact that your camera has brought out these ordinary viewpoints, viewpoints from ordinary life, and their emotional struggles and their interpretation of the historical past. You film a lot of street scenes, and then as the film goes on, I really feel that the street scenes are also full of emotion. That your camera moves under the bridges and over the landscape, and sometimes there is a face of a child, a little cat, an older lady, and so because the people who you let speak in the film are just one of these. They're not experts, they're not historians, they're not. They just share their own interpretation of this huge, complex past, and I think that's really a accomplishment of this film. And I also thought about the dreams, China's 3 dreams, and I thought about dreams as unconscious. We all have unconscious. We are driven as individuals by our consciousness and also by our unconscious drives and desires that are very historical, and the society as well. And so when you look at the landscape in China, when you film it with that kind of emotional shots, that fountain that goes up to I don't know how many floors, you see conscious shaping of the landscape, but you also get a glimpse of the unconsciousness in the society, and the nightmares and the dreams. And that I thought that the film is edited in almost like a dreamscape. Sometimes I feel it's so fragmentary, and it's not very chronological. So I really feel that it has this logic of the dream. But as a historian, when I first saw the film, so this is the second time I saw the film. When I first saw the film, I thought, because I didn't know that actually ordinary Chinese people would think that the Cultural Revolution was not talked about and was not narrated, because I work on modern Chinese history, and I have seen so much written about the Cultural Revolution, films made about the Cultural Revolution, and you used Blue Kite, which is one of the films on the Cultural Revolution made in 1993 and then subsequently banned in China. So people have been producing a lot of history of this period. But then I thought, okay, I have to take what these people think seriously, because we can't say, they haven't read enough, but because that's just not the way we should, treat this material. And then I thought, okay, maybe history of the Cultural Revolution is just not written in the way that these people could use. That somehow we've written the history of the Cultural Revolution for a different discourse. It's the digestion of that period, which is a crucial transformative period in those people's lives. They were not breathing it. They were not talking about it. in the society, it's not voiced in the society. So even though so many shelves of books have been written about this period, there's still something lacking, and I think your film really showed me that.
I think that you see that quite poignantly with the grandfather towards the end there, where they begin to question him. And I feel quite generously try to draw his story out. And you see the emotional difficulty with even connecting with those memories, connecting with that past. Do you think that there's an element of the older generations for which those memories are too painful for them to really be encouraging the younger generations to engage with that history?
I think that is possibly the most significant scene in the whole movie. You know? I think it's I find it even more painful in the sense that the person is. I don't think it's the pain for what has happened, but rather the fact that the silence that he's trying to keep, that somehow is also part of his personality, the way that he's treated his family, has been exposed. You know, it's been exposed in a way that still today makes him feel different, makes him feel hard. I mean, I
sense a certain amount of shame in there.
There's more shame than there is pain. I think it's somehow the remembering those moments at a time celebration in a way just doesn't seem to fit. It's not what this person wants to be remembered for. He doesn't want to be remembered as a victim. He doesn't want to be remembered as someone who has a stained past, if you want. He wants to be remembered as someone, as something else, as a patriarch.
I met him a number of times, not too much. He lived in Chengdu, not in Chongqing, and so I saw him a couple of times. But he was a terribly powerful figure, and obviously had always been so. He was locked up. He was in a labour camp and so on for 22 years, but he was always a powerful figure, and he was always an intelligent man with a great humour and a great ability and a sense of his own self. And so, yes, I think that at the end, he sort of felt, my own feeling at that time when I was watching it was that he'd overcome all this, and now why are you doing this now again to me? You know, and that was terribly important to me when I'm watching, because, well, for all the reasons, this was exactly one of the reasons why the young people don't know. And they all laughed and everything while they were asking him questions. They were all saying they could do anything to you. They could lock you up for anything. And the young people were happy and talking and so on. And his story was just bubbling under that surface.
But I think, just to come back to what you said, Luigi, about he doesn't want to be remembered or known as a victim, I think, is there something quite profound in that if we were to extrapolate that for the entire country? Is that really what's taking place here? This is a country that wants to move forward, and it doesn't want to be known as a victim.
Well, okay. I mean, that may be part of the story, but I also think that actually the Cultural Revolution is a very complex history, and I think that the lack of articulation from the older generation also comes with the complexity. I think that because a lot of the victims are also perpetuators. But at the same time, I'm not saying that the grandfather was, but I'm just saying that when you look at the society, a lot of perpetuators in the end also become the victims. But the Cultural Revolution is also experienced very differently for different people. The intellectuals were hit the most because they had the most suspicious backgrounds. A lot of them were educated in Western institutions, and they came from rich families. But the workers in the factories and in the schools, the workers enjoyed a certain kind of freedom. I mean, there were there were positive things in the Cultural Revolution that turned bad. I mean, the Cultural Revolution was just really a complex, historical phenomenon. And the problem was that after the Cultural Revolution ended, when Deng Xiaoping came into power and assessed the Cultural Revolution, it was condemned as this evil, enormity, basically that nothing, we just want to get rid of it and move on, and we didn't really need to learn lessons because these were really out there. It was so ridiculous, it was so absurd that we didn't want to learn the lessons from it. And I think that made it very hard for the older generation to articulate their experiences, like the mother and the father, for example, and then not the grandfather's generation. The grandfather was basically locked in. It was before the Cultural Revolution. Yes. He was locked in. Late 1950s, and so he was a pure victim. He didn't do anything. But the middle generation, they did a lot of things, and they had beliefs, and they saw the problems of bureaucracy, for example. They were supportive of Mao's continuous revolution, and they found some logic in it. But then they became, it went totally out of control. So what they're narrating is really a popular version of that history. Is how I really see how people make sense of history in their narration. At the same time, I also think that historians really still have a lot of work to do to unearth that period, to really see its legacies and why it had went wrong, why it had gone wrong, so that actually that generation of people could understand what's the sense of all their losses and all their struggles. Because at the moment for them it didn't make sense, and it didn't make sense still now that China is becoming very capitalist, and just as in the film it said, it became life was meaningless and so on, and I think that also had to do with that period, that socialist period, was not processed.
Yeah. Can I just ask, Luigi? I know that one of your specialties is urbanization in China, and one of the things, to answer your question earlier, Lex, that drew me to this story was that I found, we should speak closer to the mics, I suddenly realised. I'm sorry, people. What I realised was that when I found that Sichiko, which is the 1100-year-old village within the city boundaries of Chongqing in Sichuan, I was absolutely taken with the fact that here was a live community of that age, and I hadn't seen many in the rural areas or in the cities. I wonder how you feel about some of those themes that I was trying to approach in the films actually coming across, because there was such a sense of community.
Look, it's a gigantic topic. I mean,
yes.
The question of how China transforms its cities and it preserves its heritage or not preserve its heritage, or has a different idea of what heritage actually means, and whether heritage is about preserving, or it's about rebuilding, or it's about recreating. I mean, that's a very significant thing. You find in Beijing, you still find communities that somehow are connected to more heritage, older neighborhoods, although they have mostly been rebuilt, lately, during the reconstruction of Beijing for the Olympic Games. So today you have a push that is not only coming from the government, of course it's coming from the government because governments have interest in having large communities and having the value of the land be inflated, etc. But also you have communities of private owners who are very much attached to the value of what they have actually purchased. And some of the scenes in the movie where where they were going to see these new apartments, and discussing about how expensive they are. Well, many times these conversations end up in, yes, let's buy it, and let's borrow money from the family to buy the apartment, because it's necessary if you want to create a family to have an apartment or to buy private property.
And that question drove that couple apart.
That's what I understand. But those questions are very significant, You'll find your children having a car and having a house are sometimes some of the things that are necessary to actually have a successful marriage.
Do you think, though, that the film is in any way helping us to understand a little bit about the diversity of urbanization and big blocks of flats and community in a very old place?
Well, if I wanted to be cynical, I would say that that communities like the ones you've seen are probably residual, if you want, or only residual. They don't have a future, if you want, or have a very limited possibility to develop into something else.
Yeah, no, I think that the film does show me. I think that the fact that this community would be demolished without putting up a resistance, like we saw, in the Sydney, in rocking the foundations, and in Sydney, and actually many neighborhoods in China, all over China, were demolished without enough resistance. There are definitely resistance, but government was very quick to break the resistance. I mean, the government does a good job in general on these. In Hong Kong, even such huge resistance became, they were broken down and so on. But that has to do not only with the fact that the government was good at breaking resistance, but also had to do with the lack of connectivity between people. And then you are showing this young woman, going to her own family, seeking that connection. And not only to seek for effective connection, but to seek people's opinions about politics. To talk about politics, what happened, what do you value, what can we go on with? And I think that this kind of dialogue, if done in these communities, would put up a better resistance. Yeah, no, I mean, in the film you could see the different kinds of political discussions the Chinese people engage, right? I mean, when they're having dinner, they were talking about America and Russia and Taiwan, and then when some people were saying that the days of the Communist Party, that the current one, it might be numbered, but I wouldn't say the number, because only after I come overseas I'll say number and so on.
觉得时间年
这个就不能说了啊，等我出了国再说吧。
So I mean, there are lots of political discussions, but the problem is that it's impossible to have political action, and it's not only impossible from in terms of the government cracking down. It's also kind of impossible when you talk about politics in that way. I mean, I just think that there are multiple reasons why we don't see rising political consciousness and political action in China to change some of the things that they complain about, about the connections that you need to have in order to survive, and the working class poverty and all that. And I think your film shows that the connectivity between people and the sort of really talking about history, about politics at that level, and challenging each other, might offer some solution.
Could we ask if
Yeah, I was just
anybody
about to
wanted
say, I think it's time to grab some questions from you, the audience. Who would like to ask a question? I will run up to you with the microphone.
Did Zhang Lei's town end up getting demolished, or is it still sort of in the process of being demolished? Did it survive? I don't know if you guys touched upon this while talking.
It's still there. I took the film back to show to the families and the Red Guards and the rebels, and get all their feedback and let them see and so on what they thought of it. And that they are it's just scraping the surface, just touching the surface, that renovation or destruction of Sichiko. It's actually wanting to make it into a much more effective tourist zone, so that developers in league with the government are, in agreement with the government, are trying to knock over old buildings and make replica buildings that look like the old buildings, and try to create a greater tourist magnet for foreigners, as well as people from, mostly it's Shanghainese and Beijing people I noticed that were visiting in that town, but there were occasionally Westerners too. And I think that it's really destined to be a tourist centre. And I don't know how much they'll destroy it. I think they won't destroy it. I think they'll just try to keep all the buildings, knock over the things that need knocking over, and rebuild them. So all the people, I'm worried about the community being lost, the sense of community, because that's what they are worried about.
There's another question up there, so you might.
Okay, thank you.
How did you initially come across your central young female character? I know you had early contact with China, but was it a conversation in the street? How did you come across it?
Thank you. I think I have a flat battery. Thank you. Okay, in brief, it came about because of what I was saying before. I wanted to find a story within that community, Sichiko. I went there many times. I talked to many people. I often filmed conversations with people with the help of somebody I could find who spoke English as well. And one of those trips, there was a young man who was helping me, and he helping me to interpret for me, and he had met her. So we spoke to many people, including fantastic stories I found. Like there was a man who everyone knew was a Red Guard and had done terrible things, and they all said, "Yes, him." And we went and talked to him. And he said, "No, I wasn't the Red Guard." And so I thought, right, there's one film, one story. The Red Guard who wasn't a Red Guard is a terrific sort of symbol of a lot of things. But we didn't go any further with that. But we did speak to many people, and of all generations, of all ages, from the post 90s to the oldest grandma Tan and so on. And this woman was one that I met, and I thought, wow, this woman has got a real link into this place. She'd come from the city to live there deliberately. She hadn't been an old resident, and she was a single mother, and she had at that stage a 7-year-old Xiaobao daughter, and so we talked, and it took a long time before she could trust me, naturally. So it was probably a year or 2 years of talking with her and filming her. She didn't mind, but she really put me through, a great sense of investigation. Can you show me the films that you've made? Can you show me how I can find out about you, what sort of person you are? We used to joke about, trust and lack of trust, which is essential for a documentary. And that was really a long period before she did. But when she committed and she realised what was happening was really making a change to her life, she felt she'd write to me all the time, and we write to each other through Google Translation, unfortunately, most of the time. And but when she realised that was really giving her a sense of much more a sense of purpose and confidence in finding out about herself, she really committed. And once she committed, she opened up her family to me. And once she opened up the family, then that opened up the extended connections, like the Red Guards and the people that they knew. And suddenly, years later, it starts, getting to the stage where people are going to be filmed by a foreigner in the middle of, about their real lives. But it came because I was looking for a story in that place. And she was just so wonderful, such an intelligent, extraordinary person.
We have another question here.
Nick, I've got this is a short question with a maybe an impossible answer, but what did they think about it when you showed it to them?
It was really emotional because all those people came together and they hadn't been together since the Cultural Revolution. So, and her parents had never met since then. So they were watching their daughter talking about how negligent they were, and they were completely, silent, and then they answered separately in their own ways, but they never spoke to each other during that whole 2 days. And the other people discussed everything. I think that really what they all felt, the point I got from one thing where people were talking was that they thought, well, he's been doing this for a long time, so it's going to be good. They thought it would be a good film, but they said they were really surprised that it was a real movie, as they put it. They said, that they'd expected a Western documentary with a presenter telling you everything. And they said they were so grateful because every voice was a Chinese voice. And that was probably the biggest impact that I got from their reaction to the film. But there's a lot more to say.
We can have one more question up here.
Nick, thank you very much for your film. It's a wonderful film. I wanted to ask you about whether people, why people didn't seem to be fearful, and this might be a very naive, ignorant question, about expressing discontent with the current regime and, being in a film that would be seen.
Look, I've got my ideas, but could I pass the buck a little bit and ask, well, first Ying, if she had anything to say, why would people speak about, is it unusual or usual that they would actually speak about things like this?
I think in your film there is a young character who talked about the internet, and that people actually post a lot of critical messages, criticism about the government, against the government on the internet. And if you are just an ordinary person, you don't have so many followers, to your blog or microblog or Twitter. I mean, they don't use Twitter, but like WeChat account or something. Then you're quite safe. So as individuals without much political power, and the bottom line is that collective action is just not allowed on the streets. But if you just complain without having social media to spread it to 1 million people, then it's fine. But that's I think that's my guess.
Sometimes we expect. There are different realities in people's life in terms of their relationship to the government, and it's very normal in conversations. And this, to me, appear like some almost private conversations, or despite the fact they were filmed by a foreign director, but somehow there were private conversations, and people were interpreting it that way. And you will find the most extraordinary form of criticism in a lot of private conversations. That doesn't mean that people necessarily would follow that up with some sort of action, if you want. And I think this is also one of the ways in which this government has managed to become both neoliberal and while at the same time remaining authoritarian. And there are many ways in which these discourses somehow people know what the limits are, and they know that they cannot really put this type of criticism in black and white, because otherwise the risk is very significant. But in a private conversation they would do. And I imagine that the movie in a way gave them a possibility to go on the record, but knowing that somehow there will not be too many people in China that will see those or hear those statements in a way. And so probably you may want to say your...
Well, I think that's right. And I was just going to say that when you're filming those private conversations as they are, that of course, two things to say. One is that it does take years to obviously create some sort of a net of confidence or trust in this operation by an outsider. That you can't just walk in there like 60 minutes and get that, of course. But basically, if you're prepared to put the time in, then you can actually get some sort of access as a witness to a private conversation, or it's such as it seems. And in that case, people will do exactly what Yang and Luigi have said. They will speak like they always do. But you have to spend a lot of time to get there to that stage. Then the other part that you referred to, which is really important, is that people did want to say these things. They really wanted to. So if they felt at this point, they felt that it's possible to trust this foreigner, it's possible to trust this, then it made it even more of an opportunity for them, I felt, to say what they really felt.
Unfortunately, we do have to wrap up and move on. Would you like to make any closing statement before we say farewell?
I won't. I'm just really pleased that you came. I just love people to see this because, my closing statement is that no Australian television is even slightly interested in this. And I'd spent 12 years making it for Australian television. And I think it says a lot about what our new broadcasting environment has become in the last decade, that all these films like mine, but like many others, they just are not commissioned, and Australians can't make those sort of films anymore, except for France or Europe or North America, but we can't do that here. There's a political statement.
But congratulations to you to sticking with it, fighting the good fight, self-producing and self-distributing. Would you please thank our guests? Thank you all for joining us so much.
Thank you very much for coming.